Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we're going to talk about the forces that are actively at work, constantly trying to suppress the reality of the extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence presence here on this planet. This has been going on a long time, and on this channel, on this podcast, I've talked many times, I speculated many times on the reasons for it. Is it the government? Is it because of the reverse engineering reasons? The debunkers, are they afraid? Are they working for the government? There's all kinds of theories. I don't really want to get into all of that today. I don't want to talk about the why. I just want to acknowledge it. I just want to talk about the what. We just look at it and just accept it. We need to acknowledge what's happening here. We are being there's information and a reality that is being suppressed from the world, the entire world. Some of us understand that there is something here because we had our own experiences, or we've done the research and we know. And the data is out there that most certainly it tells us that there's a presence on this planet that's not human, and that is most certainly more advanced technologically than the human race is. So I just want to talk about some examples here today, on how we're getting suppressed. I mean, examples that show that the information is being suppressed. Let's forget about the why for today. Let's just look at it and just acknowledge it and just know that it's really happening. And anyway, I just want to, yesterday's podcast, I was talking about the Las Vegas alien story again. It was brought up. There was this popular YouTuber named Sherman who actually scored an interview with Angel and Joshua Kenmore, who were two of the brothers. Along their father wasn't in this interview. Bobby, he wasn't part of the interview, but those three people saw that there was something that came down in their yard during the early morning hours of May 1st last year, and they went out to investigate. And there's 8 to 10 foot tall alien beings in their backyard, two of them. Now, debunkers right out of the gate, of course, said, "Oh, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's a hoax. A hoax." Right? A lot of people just didn't believe it. Just without even looking into it. There was, even though there was some evidence to go along with it, they didn't even bother to investigate. There was some video footage that was taken, and I shared that footage again last night. Some of the footage, there was a little segment that crime scene reconstruction expert Scott Roeder clearly showed that there was something in that yard that was very strange and was moving toward those people when they tried to go back into the yard while they were waiting for the police to show up, because they actually called 911. Like I've talked about in the past, for one thing, I just can't imagine somebody pulling off a hoax and calling 911 saying that there's aliens in the backyard if there really wasn't aliens in the backyard. So there are many reasons why I believe that this is a legitimate case. But you had debunkers right out of the gate saying, "Oh, no, it's for one thing, that there was body cam footage before this incident happened, before these people saw these aliens. There was something that fell from the sky, and it was captured on a body cam footage from a police officer nearby. So we had that." And then, of course, there was the video footage of the being. At least one of the beings could be seen in video footage, as I detailed yesterday. But yet, it was written off. But these people have stood their ground, and they said, no, this really happened. They're still telling us that. But the rest of the world is not accepting this for whatever reason. This isn't gigantic news like it should be. The fact that there really was something in that backyard. It's been suppressed. Mick West, before, apparently he was so quick to call it a hoax. He was saying before the thing even hit the ground, it's practically before the meteor. They call it a meteor before it even landed, before it even hit the ground. It was he was calling it a hoax practically. So you had that. And then you had, there was about 4 months after, you had Inside Edition did a little piece on this. They interviewed them. They had the two sons and the father draw pictures of what they saw, and for some reason, Inside Edition felt compelled to contact an expert to try to provide an alternate version of what happened. And that expert, for some reason, they think they would contact a scientist, maybe someone like Gary Nolan, who's actually interested in this subject and is talking about it a lot. What, they didn't contact him. No, they contacted a retired video game programmer to get his comments, and he said it was probably a raccoon or a coyote. It could have been something like that. Because these people will never admit it. They won't even investigate it. None of these debunkers ever investigate anything. They don't care. They just don't care. They don't believe it out of hand. They're just not going to accept it. And reasons, we're not even going to get into that today. But that's just another example of how this information is being suppressed. And it's been going on like this for a long time, and it's still happening. And actually what happens here, because of the way people who have these experiences are treated by the media, by the skeptics, how they're treated by people within the government, because of that, there's a fear factor. Then it's almost like verbal terrorism, right? You can, if you have an experience, if you're someone out there and you have an experience with a UFO and or an alien creature, right? You have to think twice before you go talking about this publicly. I mean, if say something really significant and you think it's really important, but you're going to think twice about sharing it publicly because you see what happens to other people who have done this in the past. Nobody believes them and they get made a fool out of, and people on TV, on the news stations and stuff will start laughing about it and making a joke about it. And they'll bring on these debunkers who weren't even there to provide their expert commentary on this. And it is an expert. They're not even scientists, a lot of these people. Like this retired video game programmer we're talking about. So this is how it's been for a long time. And there's so many different other cases. And the effect that this has, right, because of the suppression of reality. I mean, over the decades, this has caused some people, there's people among us who are just totally, completely, absolutely ignorant to this because of this. For instance, Stanton Friedman used to call it the Susskind syndrome. This was David Susskind he had a TV talk show back in the 70s, and that's when I'm going to refer to this book here by Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Martin, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. It's about the people. It's about it says here right on the cover, the truth behind the misinformation, distortion, and derision by debunkers, government agencies, and conspiracy con men. Yes, and this is a great book, but if you have high blood pressure, make sure you take your blood pressure pills before you read it. But anyway, I just want to read a little section of this book here about what happened with Stanton Friedman when he appeared on a show, on this David Susskind show back in the 70s. Susskind's producer called Friedman while he was still living in California to come to New York to request that he supply an alien abductee, a skeptic, and written material for the show. Between segments, when he finally went on the show, between segments, Susskind told Friedman that he read the New York Times regularly and had not seen anything indicating flying saucers were real, so saw no point wasting his time on saucers. Friedman has often talked about the Susskind syndrome, which is this is what he says it is. I am so well informed that if this was true, I would already know about it. I don't, so it must not be true. Talk about arrogance coupled with ignorance. Yes, that's what it is. Arrogance coupled with ignorance. So people out there among us who fall victim to this suppression of reality, this is what you get. Like David Susskind back in the 70s, he didn't read about it in the New York Times, and therefore it mustn't be real, right? The New York Times isn't reporting on this. But like that's what happens here. You have the mainstream media, which for the most part has done a horrible job over the decades. A horrible job. In 2017, when the New York Times finally ran that article, it was amazing when they ran that article talking about those leaked Pentagon videos. That was something that usually doesn't happen, but it did, and it was necessary. It was something that I'm glad finally happened. But now they're starting to pull back a little bit, right? I mean, some of these, like David Grush story, for instance, the New York Times didn't publish that, right? They stayed away from it. They let somebody else do it. Washington Post, they stay away from these things. They bunkers. Everyone says this. You have all these people constantly all over the internet, all the time, telling us there's no proof, there's no evidence, there's no proof, there's no evidence. Even though people like Grush, a whistleblower, along with 40 other whistleblowers, have been apparently meeting with members of Congress in secure facilities to hear testimony from them about what's going on behind the scenes with regard to reverse engineering and crash retrieval programs. But again, we're not here to try to understand the reasons why today. We just need to acknowledge it. It's very important that we acknowledge this obvious suppression of information, and it's been going on a long time. Now, regarding that the Vegas alien story, it's very reminiscent of a 1952 case, the Flatwoods Monster case. And I just want to touch on that for a minute and then talk about how, that even back then in 52, there's it seems like there's this effort to try to pretend that it's not real. And even years later, worse is even years later, people still trying to debunk it and trying to come up with ridiculous explanations to say that this was all nonsense. But I'm just going to read a little article here, a little piece of an article from History.com. In 1952, the Flatwoods Monster terrified 6 kids, a mom, a dog, and the nation. It prompted the United States Air Force UFO inquiry, part of an initiative called Project Blue Book. Yeah, this was the beginnings of Project Blue Book. And it says here, the Flatwoods Monster has not hissed at boys in the little village of Flatwoods, West Virginia since September 12, 1952. People grin about it now. Of course, see, the history's making a joke out of it. People grin about it. Not a Flatwoods Monster. But it's again, this is a way to suppress information. It's a way to make people hesitant if they ever experience anything themselves from ever telling anybody. Because look, people are going to laugh at you. They're going to grin about you. They're going to write articles on History.com and say, people grin about it now. Anyway, people grin about it now and take monster souvenir money from hundreds of monster tourists every week. But it scared people plenty back then, including the eyewitnesses. 6 boys aged 10 to 17, a dog, and a mom. One of the boys peed his pants, said John Gibson, a high school freshman at the time who knew them all. Their dog, Ricky, ran with his tail between his legs. The encounter made the local and national news, scaring a wider swath of people. Then it prompted a United States Air Force UFO inquiry, part of a project called Project Blue Book that dispatched a handful of investigators around the country to look into such claims. Okay, we're going to skip forward and just talk about what they witnessed. It was dusk when they saw it. The May brothers, Ed, 13, and Freddie, 12, had been playing in their schoolyard with their 10-year-old friend Tommy Heyer. After noticing a pulsing red light streak across the sky and crash on a nearby farm, the 3 youngsters ran to grab the May's boy's mother, then hightailed it up that hill to check out where the light had landed. A few other boys, one with a dog, showed up too. They ran back down in sheer incredible terror. 7 Braxton County residents on Saturday reported seeing a 10-foot Frankenstein-like monster in the hills above Flatwoods, a local newspaper reported afterward. A National Guard member, 17-year-old Gene Lemon, was leading the group when he saw what appeared to be a pair of bright eyes in a tree. Lemon screamed and fell backward, the news account said, when he saw a 10-foot monster with a bloody red body and a green face that seemed to glow. It may have had claws for hands. It was hard to tell because of the dense mist. The story made the local news, then got picked up by national radio and big papers all over the country, said Andrew Smith, who runs the Flatwoods Monster Museum and the Braxton County Convention Visitors Bureau. Mrs. May and the National Guard kid ended up going to New York to talk to CBS, Gibson said. Okay, see, now, what happens after this, though, over time, the suppression comes in. Well, that's not what they really saw, of course, right? So because there's forces out there actively trying to suppress the reality of this. Like if you go to, of course, Wikipedia now, Wikipedia is a joke, as we've been talking about these days. You can't trust anything in Wikipedia now, right? They talk about this case. They don't really give you a lot of information. But about 1/3 of the article is devoted to Joe Nickel. He's a debunker out there with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and it has a big explanation from him in here that explains it, so people, because when people go to Wikipedia, they'll read a little report about what happened, right? But then underneath it, you get like 3 big paragraphs talking about what Nickel concluded. Like, he's important. This guy, he's Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He's supposed to be some scientific group that goes out there to give you explanations for these claims of paranormal activities, including UFOs and extraterrestrial encounters, right? And Joe Nickel, he's an English major. He's not a scientist, but yet this is who the guerrilla skeptics of Wikipedia are thrown in here as the main person who has all the answers. But anyway, here's what he wrote. Here's what it says about him. It says, after he investigated the case all years later, almost 50 years later, after investigating the case in 2000, Joe, not worth a plugged nickel, of the Committee of Skeptical Inquiry conclude, and I just drew that in there. I just want to stop there. It's not worth. That's my nickname for him, Joe. Not worth a plug nickel. Okay, that's just a little dumb joke. But anyway, Joe Nickel of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry concluded that the bright light in the sky reported by the witnesses on September 12th was most likely a meteor, that the pulsating red light was likely an aircraft navigation or hazard beacon, and that the creature described by witnesses closely resembled an owl. So I have this pulled up on the screen now so you can see what we're looking at here. It has a picture of a barn owl there with claw-like hands and a face shaped like the ace of spades. Isn't this interesting, though? Right? Isn't this very similar to what we're hearing now from Mick West and the Vegas alien? I mean, he's saying it's a coyote or a raccoon, something like that. This guy's talking about 6-foot tall or 10-foot tall owls, barn owls, right, with their claw-like hands. That's what these people saw. All these witnesses is what they saw back in '52. Nichols suggested that witnesses' perceptions were distorted by their heightened state of anxiety. Nichols' conclusions are shared by a number of other investigators, including those of the Air Force. Well, of course, the Air Force is going to go, oh, yeah, thanks, Joe, for giving us that one. We agree with you. The night of the September 12 sighting, a meteor had been observed across 3 states, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. According to Nickel, 3 flashing red aircraft beacons were also visible from the area of the sightings, which could account for descriptions of a pulsating red light and red tint on the face of the supposed monster. Nickel concluded that the shape, movement, and sounds reported by witnesses were also consistent with the silhouette, flight pattern, and call of a startled barn owl perched on a tree limb, leading researchers to conclude that foliage beneath the owl may have created the illusion of the lower portions of the creature, described as being a pleated green skirt. Researchers also concluded that the witnesses' inability to agree on whether the creature had arms, combined with May's report of it having small claw-like hands, which extended in front of it, also matched the description of a barn owl with talons gripping a tree branch. Now, according to Stanton Friedman in his book here, and Kathleen Martin, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, I want to allow them to retort. Yeah, it says here, Nickel also released a statement claiming that what was observed in Flatwoods, West Virginia in 1952 by a number of people was a 6-foot tall owl. Nickel had gone to Flatwoods but had talked to none of the witnesses and had not visited the field and woods where the Flatwoods monster was observed. So, and there was a guy out there who named Frank Fascino who did investigate this story, unlike Nickel, but you don't see his comments here at the end here. You don't see him talk. They don't have him in there. Again, there's an obvious effort here, right, to suppress information regarding to this phenomenon. It's always been this way. It's still going on right now. We have, for instance, right now, you just about every single day, pretty much, you have that New York Post quote reporter, end quote, or whatever he is, Stephen Greenstreet, constantly putting in disparaging articles about people like Lou Elizondo, Christopher Mellon, George Knapp, among others, constantly saying they're all crackpots. That's what he calls them. See, it makes it what's going on here. This is an effort, again, to suppress it by doing these kind of things consistently, saying that people are crazy or crackpots or anything like that. It makes people hesitant to get involved, right? And I don't care. Let them say anything about me. I'm going to call them a crap. That's why when people, I haven't been doing it as much lately. A lot of times I call these people dummies, dum-dums, dumbbells, crackpots, idiots, morons, and so on and so forth. That's because I'm trying to throw it back in their face, because they've been doing it to the people in the UFO community, people who have experienced these things for decades. It's time to know they're the crazy ones. They're the crackpots for not accepting this reality. They're a bunch of scared chickens, or whatever the case is. Either that, or they're trying to be part of the cover-up for some reason or other. We don't know. Again, I don't want to even get into the reasons why. I just want to talk. I think we need to acknowledge this. That's what we need to do. We need to acknowledge it. It's like the Pascagoula, Mississippi incident from 1973. I mean, those two guys, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, okay, they go fishing one night after work, and a flying saucer or some kind of UFO comes, lands behind them. Three robots come floating out, grab them, drag them into the craft. They're subjected to some sort of experiments or examination. Then they're dragged back out, and they're left there. They're in shock. They were actually in shock. They actually talked about what they should do. They weren't going to do anything at first because they're worried about people thinking they're crazy. But then they decided, okay, no. Hickson's like, no, we should tell the police. People need to know about this. Of course, they go to the police, and what happens? The police are, they're not really believing them, but then they leave them in a room, and they don't tell them though that they have a tape recorder going, and you could hear in this tape recording, and they didn't realize they were being recorded. You could still hear them talking about how horrible it was, how scary it was, and they're very upset. They weren't making a joke. It wasn't a hoax of any kind. They really experienced something. But then, of course, you have debunkers step forward and basically say that they're liars, or they had dreams or anything like that. If you go to the Wikipedia page, this is a great source now. Wikipedia is a great source, but what it is, right? If you want to see how they're suppressing information with regard to UFOs and the extraterrestrial / non-human intelligence, now you can go to any of the pages on Wikipedia, and because we know it's being controlled now. It's being controlled by this group of guerrilla skeptics. See, who knows who's paying them, or why these people are doing this like this. We don't know the answers to that, but you could see this is another form of suppression of reality. And this is what are they? They don't even talk about the part with the tape recorder in the article when they talk about this, right? But they do have a nice, good paragraph here on the skepticism aspects to this story. It says here, aviation journalist and UFO skeptic Philip J. Klass, the J stands for jackass, by the way. No, just kidding. It actually stood for Julian, as in Julian Barnes. Anyway, Philip J. Klass found discrepancies in Hickson's stories. He noted that Hickson refused to take a polygraph exam conducted by an experienced examiner and concluded that the case was a hoax. Yeah, I mean, that's why I see this. They're called liars then. And then another one from Joe Nickel. Skeptical investigator Joe Nickel wrote that Hickson's behavior was questionable and that Hickson later altered or embellished his claims. Nickel speculated that Hickson may have fantasized the alien encounter during a hypnagogic waking dream state and suggested that Parker's corroboration of the tale was likely due to suggestibility because he initially told police he had passed out at the beginning of the incident and failed to regain consciousness until it was over, a claim supported by Hickson during his To Tell the Truth appearance. Well, again, this is all completely absolute lies and nonsense, right? Calvin Parker's life was his life was a wreck because of this incident. I mean, he ended up losing jobs. He had relationship problems. He had all kinds of issues because of this. This haunted him for his whole life. That's the other thing. People who have these experiences, it's not like something that they wanted or that they asked for. It just was something that happened to them. These guys had a moment. There was a moment where they talked about not going to the police. They ultimately decided to do it. As it turned out, it probably was a bad decision. I'm glad they did because I'm glad I know about this. Right? I'm glad I know about this story. But look what they get. Joe Nickel, who wasn't there. Philip Klass, who wasn't there. Philip Klass, who, by the way, who destroyed so many people with words. He was. That's all he was good at. This guy was a terrible person. He was a liar. And this is somebody that the debunker crowd looks up to. Total, absolute jerk. If you read about Philip Klass, they talk about him a lot in this book here. I'll leave the link for this book if you're interested in it. Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. Horrible person. In fact, he really came on the scene. One of the first big cases that he was on was the Lonnie Zamora case. Of course, it was almost 3 years later when he came in to investigate, right? Start calling Zamora a liar, all kinds of bad things. In fact, there was a couple of things in here I just want to touch on in the same book we're talking about here. Class claimed in UFOs Identified, which was a book that he published in the late 1968, that he found significant discrepancies and damaging evidence in Zamora's statements that cast serious doubt upon his story. Speaking of Zamora's harrowing experience as an adventurer, Class twisted the facts with regard to the sequence of events and criticized investigators for missing the so-called obvious inconsistency in Zamora's statements. For example, Class insisted that Zamora saw the object's 2 legs from a distance of 800 feet, but the Project Blue Book and FBI reports consistently state that he noticed the legs from a distance of 103 feet. He also cast doubt upon Zamora's observation of figures next to the craft, emphasizing the idea that they were in view for 2 seconds or so. The documented evidence reveals that although Zamora saw the figures only briefly, he was able to describe their attire and behavior. Given Zamora's excellent character assessment and his skills as an experienced police officer, there is no reason to believe that he lied. In addition to this, Class introduced fiction to the story by leading readers to believe that the major part of Zamora's sighting took place after he lost his glasses. If this were the case, Zamora's 20/200 vision would have precluded a clear description of the symbols he observed on the side of the craft. Again, this is false. Class had copies of the official Blue Book documents, so how could he have been so wrong? The obvious answer is that he was motivated by an overwhelming desire to discredit Zamora and destroy the case. I mean, even the Air Force itself and Project Blue Book, they couldn't discredit it. They couldn't. Only this guy could. Only this guy could. Because, again, it's been going on a long time. There's obviously an effort out there to completely dismiss all of this stuff, to completely throw it out the window, to completely suppress all the information. If you have an encounter, you got to think twice about telling anybody, going public with it, going to any media, or if it's a major kind of a sighting, right? You don't want your name out there because look what might happen to you. I mean, Lonnie Zamora was a well-respected citizen, but this Class came in and tried to destroy him. He tried to also, Travis Walton and all the people involved in the Travis Walton case, he tried to ruin them. He basically calling them liars. There was all a hoax. But without any kind of evidence at all, pretty much to back anything up that he was stating. So this is what we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with it for a long time since it started, basically. Well, actually, I would say probably more so in the 50s, in the early 50s. It seemed like it started. And it's still going on. We're still seeing it today. There's this constant suppression. There's this constant effort by different forces. All these different forces. You have the debunkers. Forget about the reason, but we have these people that are debunkers. You have these other people who follow the debunkers. These lower level skeptics who aren't out actively debunking, but they're big fans of the debunkers, and they think they're really smart when they make stupid statements on Twitter, like in support of what a debunker says. It's incredible. You have to check it out. And you can see right through it. It's laughable. It's absolutely laughable. And then you have the people in the government. You have Sean Kirkpatrick actually gaslighting us in broad daylight, gaslighting the whole world, and then you have the mainstream news basically not doing anything about it, not even doing any kind of investigation, not pointing out how the stories that were part of this new historical records review were bogus. There was no proof to back anything up in it, as we talked about before. You have Kirkpatrick. I mean, look at how all of this went down. The Congress creates the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. The Pentagon installs Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick as the director, and then a couple of months before they finally released this report, he resigns, and then he goes out and he starts talking all this nonsense that he shows contempt for people in the UFO community, basically calling people crazy, saying that there's crazy people in the government too that believe this. Like, anybody who believes in this, anybody who thinks that there's something to this are crazy and they're part of a cult. That's the kind of stuff this guy's saying. And there's no way that he would have been able to say anything like this if he was still the director of AARO. That would have caused all kinds of ripples, but they knew what they were doing. This was a setup from the very very beginning. You could see it happening. You could see what's going on here, right? So you have them. So you have the faction in the government, the secrecy group, right, within the government, involved in this effort to suppress. You have the debunkers suppressing on a regular basis, and you have the mainstream media, which is basically inept when it comes to this. So that helps with the suppression efforts because they don't really report it on the way it needs to be reported on. And then you have the presence itself. You have the phenomenon itself, right? That is up to no good here too, right? I mean, the phenomenon itself it doesn't want us to know what they're doing, what they're up to, obviously. Again, I'm not going to get into the reasons why. I just think we need to point all of this out. I mean, I know what I saw, right? I know I saw things that were extraordinary. I know one of these beings, well, I encountered one of these things that was not human, and I know that I saw a UFO up close and personal, and there was no way that this thing could have been manufactured by humankind, and there was a witness there with me, so I know, right? And then you have all these other people out there who know, people who have been abducted, people who have even more extraordinary encounters than anything, way more extraordinary than I had, but you have so much, and there's so many stories out there. How about, I mean, the other thing is, you look at why people who get abducted by aliens over the years, right? People who, like David Jacobs talked to, they don't even want their names. They want people to know who they really are, a lot of them, because they see what happens. They get brought on TV, their face gets plastered over the place. People don't believe them. You have skeptics coming on, telling them that they must have been dreaming, or they were had sleep paralysis or things like that. They come up with all these phony stories to try to, again, suppress this reality. That's what's happening. The reality is being suppressed right in front of our faces, and we just need to acknowledge it. It's been going on for a long time, and it's still happening. There are forces among us right now that are trying to suppress this reality. We got the debunkers, we got that faction within the government, we got the mainstream media that's totally inept for the most part, and there are elements within the mainstream media that are part of this suppression effort. You see the Jason Colavitos, the Julian Barnes, those people, right? You got all of this going on, and then of course you have the presence itself. It's not making any announcements. So there's our efforts still ongoing to this day to suppress all of it. And I even some people I get comments from on my on YouTube and on Spotify. You get comments from sometimes you get comments from people like this. Like I ask myself, why are these people contacting me? Like, well, why are they even listening to my show if they think everything that I'm talking about, they don't believe it? Like, there's a concern. That's why they want to put the seed of doubts into people's mind. For instance, I'm going to pull up some of the recent comments here on Spotify, and there was one in particular I'd like to highlight today. Yeah, Tony, guess what? Tony Equalizer. He was talking about yesterday's story. This guy regularly comments, comes on my show, sends me an email too recently too. There's certain people out there that are following me or listening to my shows, right? And then he comes on and he writes on Spotify. He's, look at this. If anyone believes that story, they need psychological help. He's talking about the Vegas alien. Right? So they're trying to tell you better not believe in this or you're crazy. Don't believe in that or you're crazy. I mean, what's this guy's game? Why is he doing this? What's up, Tony? You never thought I was going to do that, did you? Look, I'll tell you what. Right now, let me tell you, folks. Right, I talked about in my in previous podcasts in the past. I don't care anymore. Right, the gloves have been long off for me. Right, we need to get to the truth of this, and I don't care what kind of clown comes up and puts any kind of comment on there they want. Right, that's fine and dandy. Right. But guess what? I'm not. It doesn't matter. I'm going to call him out. This guy's if that's what he thinks, right? Guess what? I think that guy's a dope. That guy's a dope for not believing. If he doesn't believe it, then he obviously hasn't looked at the information. Then, right? That's what I say. I know that there's something going on, and I think that people need to recognize this. We need to acknowledge that there's an effort out there to suppress. We got the debunkers, we got their dopey acolytes, the followers who think they're smart. I think maybe Tony Equalizer might be one of the dopey acolytes, right? He thinks he's smart by saying these kind of things, right? Now he's on the side of science, even though Mick West is a video game programmer. He's not a scientist, right? So that's where I'm at with this. And I just want to tell you, folks, we need to be strong. We need not to worry about what these clowns are saying, because let me tell you right now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. They are wrong. We have the royal flush on our hands and they're holding 8 high. That's what they got. Anyway, one more thing I want to go through. I want to go through the recent Spotify polls. For the episode, Don't Fear the ET Presence, because there's nothing you can do about it anyway, I asked this question. Are you afraid of the extraterrestrial non-human intelligence presence? 53 votes so far. 12 people, or 22.6%, say yes. And 41 people, or 77.4%, say no. It's easy to say no, but if you come across one live in person, you're going to be afraid. Just want to throw that out there. I mean, I could easily sit here and say, yeah, I agree with the majority. Yeah, I'm not afraid of it. I mean, overall, I'm not afraid of it because we're living with it. We've been living with it for a long time, whether you know it or not, right? I'd be afraid if I come in contact with them again. I don't want to walk into some jackpot. Okay, and then for the most recent episode, report, government still investigating Las Vegas alien case. I asked the question, who were the 3 men wearing sunglasses who drove past the Kenmore brothers? 24 votes so far. 10 people, or 41.7%, say government agents, while 14 people, or 58.3%, say extraterrestrial men in black. Okay, yeah, I've talked about this in the past before. I don't know what explains the Men in Black. This was like a Men in Black kind of situation. I mean, we just don't know. I don't know. I think in some cases they are extraterrestrials, and in some cases they are government agents. Who these people were that showed up in front of their house after this incident happened in Vegas last year, who they were. Maybe they were for the government. Maybe they were extraterrestrial hybrids sent in to investigate, to figure out, is there somebody else coming in here to check out our planet, the one that we've already deemed ours, that we're in the process of colonizing? Who knows? Again, we could all we could do is speculate, because again, we have this most certain suppression effort to make it sound like there's nothing to this. Again, there's an active effort out there to suppress all of this. There are forces working against this reality. They don't want people to know the reality. They just want this to go on like it is without us knowing. There's something happening that they don't want us to know right now. Are we living through something that's happening right now that if everyone knew, it would change everything? Something's happening, folks, and these efforts to suppress this reality are very clear. We could speculate on what the reasons are, why they're trying to suppress it, but something is happening there, and there are efforts to suppress it. And the evidence of this suppression effort is all around us. You could look at Wikipedia now, and you can see the suppression efforts there. You could hear the government official or the resigned government official telling you there's nothing to this, and people who believe this are crackpots for the most part. That's not what he said exactly, but that's what he was making it sound like. You have all these debunkers out there saying it's crazy. You have Tony Equalizer telling us that anybody who believes in that Vegas story is crazy. That's because there's an effort to suppress. There's an effort to suppress. You just need to acknowledge it. Just look at it. We are being actively, there's an active force out there trying to suppress us, suppress this reality. Anyway, I want to say thank you all for joining me. Until next time.